South Africa, and welcome. My name is Kamogelo Dipoko, your anchor of the DPSA TV. On this episode, we wrap up on giving you a peek into the first National Labour Relations Conference brought to you by the DPSA. Let's kick off with Ms. Ingrid Dima, Chairperson of the Public Services Coordinating Bargaining Council, who delivered a powerful and insightful speech. Dima focused on collective bargaining in labour relations, as well as some notable labour relations trends in the public sector.
Colleagues, the centerpiece, as you know, of collective bargaining is embedded in the Labour Relations Act of 1995 as amended, and the Act in itself is extended to the public service and its subsidiary bargaining councils. And the right to collective bargaining is also expressed in our operations as the public sector. With regards to the public service, one would say that, as it were, it was established in terms of the provisions of the Act. If you look at Section 35 to 37 of the Labour Relations Act, that is where you will find the views in terms of how and when the Public Service Bargaining Council was established. And as you expand through the reading of the Act itself, you would also note that the Act grants the Public Service Bargaining Councils the automatic duty to bargain. And over time, the Public Service Bargaining Councils, through its organized labor, has grew rapidly, and from 2007, if one has to go back, the numbers started rapidly growing, and as it stands, and according to my understanding, the labor movement within the public service represents a fraction of about 1.3 million public servants. And the increase in itself attempts in the main to ensure that the public service employees have a voice in the workplace, have profound implications to some of the activities that are performed by the state or government, as it were, particularly when it comes to the issues of budgeting, the issues of service delivery, and also the welfare of employees across various sectors in our space. As we know, we have different sectors, that is the health sector, the education sector, the safety sector, including the infrastructure sector. And in recent years, there has been quite a number of notable trends that have emerged, and I will quickly jump to my next slide and attempt to speak about such trends. And when we look at the emergence of multi-year agreements in the public sector, one would say traditionally the rhythm of annual salary increases and annual salary negotiations in the sector seems to be fading and replaced by an increase in line with the multi-year provisions. And that has been the case, of course, since I started joining the council. That has been a projection that has been favored by the parties in the PSCBC.
Welcome back to part 3 and final National Labour Relations Conference Highlights Show. The Chairperson of Essential Services Committee, Dr. Lubuyo Bono, shared the importance of management of essential service disputes in public service, as well as the role of the Essential Services Committee in balancing the right to strike and the need of essential services.
Essential services are those services, if interrupted, will endanger life, personal safety, or health. Quite important, and I hope there is a rep or there are people from the Department of Defense who are connected. We are working currently with Defense to change their designations which talk to individuals, which is wrong. We're busy correcting that through a Section 71(9) investigation. And I must say that the Department of Defense has been quite helpful. So it is not an employee of the public service, it is a service that is rendered. It doesn't matter who renders it. And I'm sure we all are aware of the Pop Crew versus SAPS judgment, which reinforces the idea. What we do as the ESC is that we balance the right to strike with the need to provide essential services. And I know, and it's a daunting task that people sometimes fail to understand the importance of the role of the ESC, and particularly in the public service, because without minimum service agreements, you are not allowed to strike. And labor, both FEDUSA and COSATU, fought tirelessly at NEDLEC to ensure that employees in essential services have the right to strike, and achieved that in 2014 with the bill that was passed, the amendment bill, which came into effect in 2015 to ensure that people in essential services have the right to strike. So we do basically three things. One, we designate services that are essential, so we go out, we investigate, and we say this service should be essential, or this service should remain non-essential. And we're the only institution in this country that can do that. We also facilitate the conclusion of minimum service agreements, and I'll talk to you much later that we give you a long rope to negotiate. But Section 72, subsection 2 says if we get to a point where you are not concluding, we are given the right by law to determine. We also resolve disputes in essential services. As I indicated, Section 72, subsection 2 provides that if the parties fail to conclude a collective agreement providing for the maintenance of minimum services, or if that collective agreement is not ratified. Remember, even if parties sign a collective agreement, it comes to us. And the law requires one factor that we have to consider, public interest. So we have to look at the public interest factor, and you might have agreed, and municipalities were shocked when they sent collective agreements to us, and they had agreed 50-50, and broken it into numbers. And so we ask, so this 50% is going to do the work that is normally done by 100%. They say, oh, sorry, we bargained and agreed. Remember, you can't endanger life, personal safety, or health. So we have to, even if you agree, we have to ratify. And we'll send it back. We have the power to do so. So if we don't ratify, we can instead determine the minimum services that are required to be maintained in any essential services.
Dr. Luvuyo Bono and Ms. Ingrid Dima also sat for an engaging panel discussion which opened the floor to the audience to ask questions and provide suggestions regarding professionalization of labor relations in the public service. Here are some of the highlights of the panel discussion.
The issue of the 2018 agreement non-implementation. It's unfortunate when we talk about the multi-term agreement and its implications that you would say, okay, at least for the next 2 or 3 years, you will have stability, there will be this and this and that. But then our history informed us that when we did that, then we got beaten at the end of the day when it was not implemented. So I think in dealing with the issue of the relationship, if one is to look into multi-term salary agreement, those are the issues that we need to start talking about when we are mending the relationship and also rebuilding the trust deficit that exists between ourselves. And also looking into economical factors sometimes you may sit and you project to say, maybe it will look, CPI will look like this at that time, the economic conditions will look like this at that specific time. Then it surprises you. So it really needs social dialogue even more before we could really say, okay, the issue of multi-term is something that we could really embrace fully. So looking into different factors that involves that as well. And to the good doctor, I think the issue of the ESC, you mentioned the triple SBC, and those engagements were quite intense. And unfortunately, at that level, parties couldn't find one another. And that is why, you know, in your presentation, you clearly mentioned in terms of what is the next action that is being taken. I think from our side, a comment is that we're looking forward to engagements that relate to essential service. And we are quite comfortable with what you are outlining, that it is a service that is essential. It is not receiver performing the service. Immediately when receiver gets, now it's time for him to perform that function, then it becomes essential. But if it's off, no, that doesn't come to be applicable. It is not applicable in relation to that. And we hope that as and when we're going back, Chairperson, to the PSCBC, we could really deal with the issue of the 80-20 as well. Yes, the 80%, 20%, because that on its own, it really, I think that is something that could really pull us far apart, not getting into our own domestic issues, but it was freely supplied by the chair, by the good doctor there, when he said that. And as and when we are dealing with issues that has to do with essential services, I think it is important to be honest and make sure that whatever that we come to conclude, it is something that is endurable, something that can really work, making sure that the rights of the workers, because for us as a union, our interests are more based on the workers' rights, are not anyhow disadvantaged. And as well, we're striking a balance to say a service has to go on at the same time. We're not only focused on the issues of the rights, but also looking into to say that the show must go on even when we are not finding one another and we have to go on strike. I think those were the comments for now, Chair. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Tsapa Wantu. Mine is directed to the ESC. The presentation was great, and I appreciate the fact that you have spent extensively more time and money investing in training over across all provinces. Mine would be with reference to the experience that I have having worked at Gauteng Health. So there was a strike in 2018 at Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital. So I've had an opportunity to work in that case as an initiator assisted by other initiators, because it was a team of initiators working on the project. And it was a bit painful for me to see what transpired when we finalized the case. A ruling was made as a disciplinary measure. The ruling was appealed, obviously, by the unions. And before the ruling was made, some of the charges that were put to the people who were involved in the illegal strike, there was a deal that was struck to remove those charges, then which I had a challenge with. But unfortunately, I had recently joined the institution. I found the ball rolling at the time. So with what we had on the charge sheet, we worked with what we had. We had the outcome. Unfortunately, the outcome was appealed. After it was appealed, the appeal authority at the time gave us an appeal outcome. To me, the appeal outcome was very lenient, given what illegal strike, the impact the illegal strike of 2018 at Charlotte Maxeke had on patient care and other things, and the damage that the institution suffered and the money that was spent to fix some of the things that were damaged as a result of the strike. And having to deal with that appeal outcome, it was sore to me as part of the team that was working on the project, but it was not the first time it happened. It also happened at Sterkfontein, when there was a strike, an illegal strike for that matter, an outcome was given, then the same appeal authority, Gauteng Health, took a decision to become too lenient to the illegal striking employees and reviewed without looking at the circumstances and the impact of the strike. So my proposal to the ESC, as part of your training, can you also consider training the appeal authorities across the board and just to conscientize them on the implications and the impact of illegal strike, especially in the essential services, especially in health, because we are talking about a life of people being put on hold or threatened. Sometimes we have casualties as a result of illegal strike. And we know that illegal strikes are it's a dismissal offense, but each case is dealt with on its merit. But once an outcome is made and a decision on appeal is made without looking at the circumstances, it hurts us as the people who are working on the ground. Thank you.
I've got one question for each of the panel members. I had a lot of questions, but I'm not limited to one. For the PSCBC, for the chairperson, we know that the 2080 agreement, and you mentioned the impact it had in terms of the ruling from the Constitutional Court, and we saw the division that this had made, or the impact it had made with the parties to the council. But what we've not seen since that Constitutional Court judgment, there's an effort to re-establish the integrity in the PSCBC and to close the relationship between the parties. We know that there's a widening gap, and now the gap has even gone even further towards the unions. Because the unions in themselves, I think if we look at the council meetings that are taking place at this point in time, there's a huge division among the unions themselves, leave alone the employer and the unions. We even see that at this conference, there's an open absence of parties that should be here, because we are discussing important issues in the public sector. So we see unions this gap among unions and employers widening, and we're not seeing any attempt or efforts being made to close this gap. This trust deficit is one thing, but also the issue of the relationship between the parties. On the side of Dr. Bono and the Essential Services Commission, right, the idea of essential services was mooted way back when I was still a public servant, and I worked for the public servant. And I'm from public health, so I know all about strikes, unlawful strikes, unprotected strikes. And these have been going on for many years, since the dawn of our democracy. And there's been no real effort to move towards some sort of agreement, specifically in public health, to establish as an essential services level agreement. We go back even to the 2007 strikes, where in the public sector, there were unprotected strikes all over the country. And at that stage, the employer took a unilateral decision to declare all occupational groups in the public sector essential. We have never seen, and even when unions like ourselves want to go on strike at this stage, that very same list that was put up by the employer in 2007 being thrown at us now to say that all staff in the public health industry are considered essential services. And as you mentioned, rightfully, those lists are not agreements between the parties, and they are not lists that should be perpetuated by the employer. So we hope that the meeting of the 27th of February will address these issues, where specifically in health, the employer is still putting forward that all staff in public health are declared essential services. Because we know there's admin staff, there's cleaning staff, etc. Those are categories that one can never consider, maybe in all of them, to be essential. And much is being said about the legislative framework, but we aren't seeing regulations in this respect, or collective agreements, whether it be private or public sector. We know that the right to strike is an essential right that's enshrined in our constitution and even at ILO conventions. But even the ILO or the ILC at this stage is struggling to get parties to comply with the Convention on the Right to Strike. And now we know that even that matter at ILO level has been referred to the ICJ for a definition or determination. So the right to strike is quite, I think we all understand it's an important right, but it's also sometimes a confused right among people, because people don't understand that the right to strike is a right that we have as unions, and that right needs to be respected. Thank you.
Comrade Lisiba, thanks for your comments on the presentation itself. You did also mention that there is a need for parties to continue to rebuild the trust relations, and that was echoed in my presentation. In actual fact, that also goes to the question by the GS Hussein at the end, that I did make mention of the need for parties to do so, to continue to rebuild on the relationships between themselves. And there are processes, as you are aware, within the PSCBC wherein parties are engaging. One of them is also through the current debriefing session, where parties are encouraged to have an open and transparent discussions about the previous rounds of negotiations, what transpired and what can be improved. And I think that is the better position where parties can place their grievances and also attempt to encourage their other opponent or their opponents on how best to improve on the manner in which the negotiations should take place in the future. And before our next round of negotiations, GS and Comrade Lisiba, parties will also have an opportunity to engage through the pre-bargaining conference. And that platform would also afford parties another opportunity to address, as it were, various issues before we go on to the next round of negotiations. And I did allude to that issue also during my presentation, that before we enter into the next round of negotiations, it is always best that the previous issues, the previous grievances, the previous impasse should be addressed. Otherwise, such has got a great potential of affecting the negotiations themselves, including the signing of the agreements in the future. On the 80-20 ratio of the ESC, I agree. We have a meeting next week, Comrade Lisiba, and I hope that that issue would also be raised within the parameters of the discussions under the auspices of the ESC, and also within the ambits of the LRA. Would see what can be done to ensure that we improve in that regard. GS, I'm not too sure whether did I answer everything that you asked, given that I addressed it within the question that was raised by Comrade Lisiba, but there are processes in place, as I said, and I'm hoping that the encouragement that continues to ensue, that parties should work on the relationships, is taken to heart by parties within the PSCBC, number one, and that the platforms that are currently in place would be exploited by parties to ensure that such grievances, they find expressions. There is, as I said, a document that's currently sitting before the Council, which seeks to review the current protocol for negotiations, and that issue that you raised is quite critical and important, and I believe that it should be considered.
Lastly, we got a chance to speak to the National Chief Negotiator of the South African Policing Union, SAPU, Lisiba Tobachale, about how they found the conference and if the objectives of the conference were met.
From the side of SAPU, we firstly appreciate the opportunity to form part of this conference. And moreover, it goes to an extent where we are saying that social dialogue is more important.
we believe that this is the beginning of the conversation that we are having around issues that affect public servants within the public service. And it is critical that we continue to talk over issues, because some of the issues, including professionalization of the public service, it goes even further, where we have discussions within the PSCBC ranging over the very same issue, and there are other processes that are unfolding there. So we believe that social dialogue needs to proceed further within the ambits of the PSCBC, so that at the end of the day, when the framework comes to life, as Labour, we are clearly able to contribute positively into it. But moreover, we raised a whole lot of issues that relates to the conditions of service of our members, and also that relates further to how members are supposed or are expected to work within the public service. And in this conference, we believe that it has started a conversation. We don't see it as something that should end now. We strongly believe that we need to proceed further, to have even more dialogue in other platforms, so that at the end of the day, we can be able to better the public service in terms of benefits to our members, for them to be better, in ensuring that the working conditions of our members are quite conducive, and further to that, ensuring that the public service itself, it is a better place for our workers to work under and to render their services.
This is where we close off our 3-part series of the DPSA 2-day National Labour Relations Conference. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more informative and insightful episodes right here on DPSA TV. Engage with us, subscribe and follow us on all DPSA social media platforms. From me, Gamo, till the next episode, #Batubele.